Good morning, everybody. I'm so glad you're here today. Welcome, 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 everybody in our buildings and online. What's up, what's up, what's up? For 3 long months, we have been not in our buildings having church online. Many of you are still online. All of that's good. It's all good today, and I'm so glad we're doing what we're doing, because I was glad when they said unto me, let us go to the house of the Lord. I was glad about it. And so I've got a message from my heart today. We're working it out. We're moving forward. There's social distancing. There's care that we're taking, and I just want you to know that it's all good, and we're moving forward. All right. What's up, Southside? Yeah. Join together. I want to be with you next week. We're keeping it simple. We're keeping it small right now. Kind of just easing back into the into normalcy. But I want you to know that I'm glad you're there, and I'm giving you air hugs, air pats, a little air rub. I'll give you an air rub. I don't mind. Just whatever we got to do. I'm glad you're here. So today, I've been in a series on the end of time and the end of days, and I'm going to get back to that next week. But today I want to talk to you about race. It's just too much for me not to talk about. And it's been too much for so many people for so long, but I feel like many people are ready to listen in ways that you weren't ready to listen before. And so I want you to hear me, all right? So let me just be honest and clear and real with you on matters of race. I got confused by the two crowds. The why aren't you saying something crowd, and the shut up and quit talking, you've been talking long enough crowd, right? And so I had to work that out in my own spirit and head, and I have figured that out. I've navigated those waters, and I've come out on the other side. And I want to assure you that we are here for God's agenda. That's it. We're here for God's agenda when it comes to race. And it's okay to not be sure how to respond to racial issues. It is the 400-year-old difficulty, struggle, trauma in America. And I want you to know, if your heart is humble, if your heart is that of a servant, don't feel like you can't speak out, right? You're not going to say it right. Your first stab at it, your first go at these things is probably not going to go well. That's why you got to be humble. If you've never talked about it before, and then you come out with emphatic, sure opinions, you're not ready, baby. You're not ready. Humble. Servanthood, listening, okay? And so ask questions when you're afforded the opportunity as well. But we take the Bible seriously, and we don't believe that Jesus walked the earth in a racism-free, racial tension-free environment. It's not at all the case. And so I want to read you from Luke chapter 10, verse 26 today. And this is the story of the Good Samaritan, but it's also a story that we can gain a lot from today. Let's go. Verse 26, I'm like a little bit like, I got that adrenaline thing going on here. Y'all are spaced out so beautifully, but I still feel like the Lord is here. And I've been preaching in empty rooms. And I want you to know. Verse 26, what is written in the law? He replied, how do you read it? What is your interpretation? How do you slant things? What is your bias? How do you read it? Verse 27, he answered, love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your strength, and all your mind, and love your neighbor as yourself. Love your neighbor as yourself. And Jesus responded to this young lawyer who he was talking to. He said, well, you've answered correctly, Jesus replied. Do this and you will live. But the young lawyer, the young arguer, wanted to justify himself, so he asked Jesus, point of order, who is my neighbor? Who is my neighbor? In reply, Jesus said, well, here, let me answer your question with a story. He said, a man was going from Jerusalem to Jericho when he was attacked by robbers. That's not good. We're against violence. We're against people that act in these ways. He was attacked by robbers. They stripped him of his clothes. They beat him and went away, leaving him half dead. A priest. This convicts me because in this story, I got to be careful not to be the priest. because it says here, a priest happened to be going down the same road, and he saw the man. He'd seen it many times before. He'd dealt with it many times before. He had been around it many times before. And it says a priest happened to be going down the same road. When he saw the man, he passed by on the other side. Avoidance. I'm going to avoid this. It's easy for religious people to practice avoidance, okay? And then it says, so to a Levite, which was a religious, he was religious as well, but he was more of a in the trenches kind of person. A Levite, when he came to the place and saw him pass by on the other side. But a Samaritan, somebody who was ethnically different than the other two. He was not of pure Jewish blood. He was half Gentile, half Jew, and there was lots of tension around these Samaritans. And it says, but a Samaritan, as he traveled, came to where the man was, and when he saw him, he took pity on him. He went to him and bandaged his wounds. He poured on oil and wine. Then he put the man on his own donkey. He brought him to an inn. He took care of him. Then the next day he took out 2 denarii. He spent the night taking care of him. The next day he had to go, but he took out his own money and said, when I return, I have an ongoing interest in this situation. He said, I am interested in this more than for just an event where you know I'm doing it. I'm interested in an ongoing remedy for this situation. He put in his own donkey, brought him to an inn, took care of him. Verse 35, the next day he took out 2 denarii and gave them to the innkeeper. Look after him, he said, and when I return, I will reimburse you for any extra expenses you may have. I'm willing for this to cost me in an ongoing fashion, he said. Verse 36, now Jesus asked the question that you need to hear today. Everybody online, everybody in our churches, which of these 3 do you think was a neighbor to the man who fell in with the robbers? The expert of the law replied, the one who had mercy on him, and Jesus told him, go and you do the same. Have mercy on people that don't share your ethnicity. Be concerned about people that don't share your ethnicity. Jesus is charging us and them to love your ethnically diverse neighbor. This is the Word of God. This is somebody who's a lawyer or expert who is reading it for loopholes, trying to say, I like them, but I don't like them. And that is a human problem. And here's the deal. His whole mind was shaped that way because of many, many years of the Jews interpreting the Bible one way. The lawyer's questions and answers were rooted in the Old Testament, Deuteronomy 6:5, Leviticus 19:18. The Jews interpreted neighbor to mean only and exclusively fellow Jews. My only people I have to be worried about are people that act, look, think, smell, interact, like the people that are just like me are the people that I am called to be concerned about, and that's what Jesus was tearing down. And according to Jesus, the Samaritan who got out of his own way to help somebody is the best model of how to love our neighbor. Now, this story would have been nothing short of scandalous to those crowds of people in that early day because they hated each other. They were mortal enemies. They were religious in their... When you're religious and angry, you can really justify a lot of things. And so New Testament scholars discovered that there were already several variations of that same story being told by rabbis. This was a story Jesus had heard other people tell where the rabbis were the hero. Jesus had heard the story told where it was rabbis helping shipwrecked Roman soldiers. The stories had been told where the stories were making the Jews in that story the good person and the Samaritan the bad person. And Jesus flipped the script on them and told him the good one is the one you don't think is good, and that's the one you need to be aware of. So he's making the point that loving your neighbor has to transcend all racial, all cultural boundaries. And Jesus is challenging the negative bias and stereotype in the mind of the Jews that saw Samaritans as second-class people and saw themselves as compassionate heroes. It's easy for the majority of any population to write the narrative to say, I am the hero in the story. There is racial animosity in the Good Samaritan story that's easy to pick up on. And that story, Jesus told it and made it intentionally with racial overtones and racial tension because he knew we would need something to guide us in the world. And it's not our generation. It's generations past. We keep coming back to it. This is the generation that's going to be something different. And so the lawyer was hoping I can love my neighbor and still be comfortable. The lawyer was hoping I could love my neighbor and still not really live any differently. The lawyer was hoping that he could love his neighbor and still fit in without any tension with his friend groups. And that is what Jesus was challenging. Do you hear me? Jesus was challenging that. The story of the Good Samaritan is a call for people whose hearts have changed, been changed by Jesus, to action. Like he helped. And we cannot feel compassion for suffering people, for marginalized people, for minorities in our nation, and do nothing. When we do that, we're acting more like priests and Levites than the Good Samaritan that Jesus wants us to act like. So people are posting about their sadness, and they're posting about their pity for marginalized groups, but for believers, we should have something in us that moves us toward action, to where we don't say, oh, look at them, but we enlarge our circle to be bigger. We enlarge our church. We enlarge our world to include people that frankly make us uncomfortable. I'm not speaking for me, I'm speaking for you. When's the last time you had somebody in your world that didn't see the world the same way you made the world, but loved Jesus just as much as you loved him? Woo! Ha! Now I remember what it's like to preach to a crowd. I forgot. It was just so great. The cameras produced no tension. And now I feel that glorious work of the Holy Spirit in our hearts this morning. Let's give the Lord praise and glory. If you're at home right now, put some emojis in the comments to help Pastor out, if you will. It makes it even more scandalous, this story, because during this time that the book of Luke was published, about AD 51, there was something that happened called the Gennae incident, okay? Josephus talks about it, others talk about it, and it's a racial flare-up that happened in AD 51 when the book of Luke came out that let me just tell you what happened. In AD 51, people from the Samaritan village of Gennae murdered one or more. Okay, more people. The sources are contradictory on that. They murdered one or more Jewish pilgrims on their way to Jerusalem for Passover. And the Jews appealed to the Roman rulers for justice, but the Romans ignored them. And so an unruly vigilante mob from Jerusalem went and found those people and massacred them at that point. And then at that point, the Romans intervened and arrested and executed several of the Jews involved. Jesus told this story, looking people in the eye, knowing that in that moment, there was lots of tension surrounding Samaritans and Jews. Gennae incident, AD 51. This is an example of animosity and pain, and it's clear that that story was told to speak directly to racial injustice and societal issues. And so how does the story of the Good Samaritan relate to our lives today? I'm glad you asked. Let's do this. You have to realize, and I have to realize, that your experiences are just unique to you. Just because the world has worked a certain way for you and societal norms are the way they are for you doesn't mean that other people haven't experienced the same world a whole different way. And it's not just based on how you were raised or what neighborhood you're from. Like, we got to realize that being a minority in America, being black in America, feels much different than being white in America. That's not revolutionary. That's not different. That's not like, oh my God. No, really, it feels different to be black in America than it does to be white in America. And we have to realize that for people of color, for black people, they don't feel like they have experienced society systems not working quite as well for them as they do for others. For example, they don't quite trust the justice system. They don't quite trust the healthcare system. They don't quite trust the educational system to work as well for them as it does for others. Black people also, and this has been so disturbing to me, and I want you to hear my heart on this, people that I love and know that live in our city who works really hard to not be a place of hate, okay? But black men I know in this community practice hypervigilance all the time. always just checking their surroundings, always making sure they don't go off of one street into the wrong neighborhood, always making sure that when they're at the grocery store or at Target or at Walmart, that when they pick something up, they look at the cameras and do this with their hands to let everybody know I'm not stealing anything because I don't want any problems. I never have to think about that because of my skin color. But a lot of black men that I know do, and it's so natural, and it's so much a part of what they have to think about every day that it's just how they do life, and it's wrong. It's wrong. So, black people don't feel like they can gather in groups. Isn't that strange? Like black people, I'm not going to go out to a restaurant with a bunch of people of my color, because it might create a problem. So I'm going to make sure I have some white people with me. I'm just not going to go. Or we're going to have a barbecue. And by having a barbecue, we can be sure that our surroundings are safe. And if that is shocking to you, it's because we've lived in a world that doesn't require us to think that way if we're white. And I can't live with that anymore. There's a lot of things I can't live with, but I can't live with that. And so, granted, there were people in my life that spoke to me, and their motives ended up being more about a platform than helping people get closer to God. And so it put me back a little bit on it. I figured that out. I've got grace from God for it. And so now I want you to realize that it is very common for people of color in our world to feel like what happened to Ahmaud Arbery, Breonna Taylor, or George Floyd could possibly, maybe happen to them, so they better pay attention. Now, it maybe hasn't happened yet, or maybe there were no close calls, but in the back of their mind, they're thinking, ooh, I'm just not quite safe. I'm not quite safe. And so the other part of it is that black people for years have felt powerless to affect white mindsets. White mindsets have to have humility and grace. We have to love our ethnically diverse neighbors in order to get them to trust us enough so that they might share with us the difficulties and the realities of what they're experiencing. Watching George Floyd die, as we have all done, reinforces the idea to all of us that black people are powerless to change white mindsets. We must do better at loving our ethnically diverse neighbors. But as I told our city leaders yesterday, it is important for a majority population to always deal tenderly with the minority population. And so now we have a culture war that has righteousness in it, with people acting in unrighteous ways, raging in America with a pick-a-side mentality. And many of you have fully immersed yourself in the culture war, and you have not shown love, and I call you to repentance. I'm also letting you know that you're stressing me out. Not that you care. And I get that people have been through hell on earth for a long time. I'm not blind to that. I was doing this before you ever showed up. I was working on a racially diverse church, including all people, before you even realized it. So I've got some OG credentials in this town. But I want to read a section of scripture for you, Joshua 5:13. This is a time of battle and a time of war, and here's what happens. Now, when Joshua was near Jericho, he looked up and saw a man standing in front of him with a drawn sword in his hand. Joshua went up to him and said, "Are you for us, or are you for our enemies? Are you with us, or are you with them?" Because that is what society wants us to think about. I got to pick a team. I got to us or them, us or them, us or them, us or them. And here's what the servant of the Lord responded as. Verse 14. Neither, he replied. What? Don't miss that. I'm not picking one of your sides. I'm on God's side with this. Neither, he replied, but as commander of the army of the Lord, I have now come. Then Joshua realized the error of his ways and fell face down to the ground in reverence and asked him, "What message does my Lord have for his servant?" The commander of the Lord's army replied, "Take off your sandals, for the place where you're standing is holy," and Joshua did so. Never forget that division is a spiritual battle that the church must fight. Division is a spiritual battle. And if the mentality that says, if you're not on my side, you're my adversary, we have to get away from that. Us or them. Look, he said, I will not take your options. And angry and brokenhearted people are protesting. And black people aren't just protesting policy. They're protesting the pressure. They're protesting the pressure they feel. They're protesting the pressure to not be able to go for a walk in any neighborhood they want to. They're protesting the idea that they can't drive into any town they want to drive into. They're protesting the idea that they can't live in any neighborhood they'd like to move into. They're protesting that I just have to be so tired to live my life on this battlefield. And you think to yourself, surely not, surely you don't get it. I think now you're ready to hear me on this. I'm not speaking to black people, I'm speaking to white people right now. It's not my job to give black people a better black experience by teaching them. My job is to help the majority understand that there are people among you that you say you love that are struggling, and you need to do what you can to make their experience in life better. And God is about justice. God is about justice. God brings better forms of justice and righteousness than any legislation, because legislation always has loopholes and they keep taking them. But the heart doesn't have loopholes. The heart that is changed does not have loopholes. And so laws have been passed, hearts haven't been changed. How far are you willing to go to have a heart that loves like Jesus? Are you willing to experience any tension over that at all? I mean, seriously. So remember, I'm trying not to bring social media posts into the pulpit, but hear this out. When Boston was bombed, the hashtag was Boston Strong. Nobody was like, Kansas City's great too. Boston had just been bombed by terrorists, and people died, and the whole city was on lockdown. Boston Strong. People were like, well, St. Louis is a great town. We have great things. Nobody did that because they realized the place that was hurting is what needed the attention. I'm not talking about platforms, and I'm not talking about organizations. But when people say Black Lives Matter, it's like saying Boston Strong. There is a fire, there is a difficulty, there's a struggle that our people in minority communities and black people and people of color are experiencing that others are not, and that's why they're saying Black Lives Matter. Can you say the name Ahmaud Arbery out loud? Can you say the name George Floyd out loud? Can you say the name Breonna Taylor out loud? It's just a microcosm of everything that has happened. You put a name on it, and those names shouldn't be forgotten. So, we sort people with us and them. But there's bias that I don't want to see unchecked in our lives. I feel like we're dishonest. We say we love Jesus, and then we're full of bias that nobody ever confronts us on, and that is unhealthy. Let me tell you about bias, okay? I went to Sicily last summer. I walked off the boat, and I was like, hey, my people, I'm half of you, come on. I mean, I have bias toward Italians. Like, if I walk into a room, I'm going to learn how to cough never mind, I'm not going to cough at all. I'm going to swallow, just move on. If I walk into a room and people are cooking sauerkraut on one side and people are cooking spaghetti and meatballs on the other side, your boy is going to the spaghetti and meatball side all day long. I have nothing for the sauerkraut crowd. Not saying sauerkraut's bad. I just don't have anything for it. I'm with the spaghetti and meatball people. Right. Those are my people. That's bias. I prefer spaghetti and meatballs over sauerkraut every day of my life. Right. Okay? I'm going to talk to you about characteristics of group bias. I want to put on the screen here. I want to put on the screen there. Take out your phones. Take a picture of this. It's not original to me, but it will help us. 9 characteristics of group bias. I'm more comfortable with people like me. I'm more inclined to spend time socially with those like me. I'm more patient with those like me. I give the benefit of the doubt quicker to those like me. I express more grace when mistakes are made by people like me. It's easier to communicate with those like me. I assume that I'll get along easier with people like me. I'm more willing to go out of my way to help people like me. I possess more positive assumptions about those like me. That's how I feel about the spaghetti and meatball crowd. I do not understand sauerkraut people. The stuff is nasty. It stinks when you cook it. Who eats things that are fermented? For real, it's just not right. And all my Germans, I don't want to hear from you today. I love you. I'm making one little point about one thing. Sauerkraut. But the opposite is also true. There are people that are hurting right now. They've been hurting for years. They've been hurting for their whole life. And honestly, in America, somebody needs to say it, white culture has been more powerful than black culture, although black culture is pop culture. But racism will be eliminated when the church models it and when white people care. White people care. And there are people hurting. And you need to say it out loud. Maybe you need to say it by yourself. Maybe you've just thought it, never said it out loud. But you need to say, I believe a black life is as valuable as a white life. Like, well, I believe that. Okay, say it. Just say it. Just say it, right? Don't hesitate to say it. And the group that we're all in says there are things that you can and cannot say. And I'm off. I mean, I've been off that forever, but I'm off of it. Just want you all to know it, and you know it, but I'm going to tell you again. And so the opposite of in-group bias is just like your non-group bias. It just plays out differently. Here's how that goes. Put them on the screen. You can take a picture of it. I am less comfortable with people not like me. The first time I walked into an all-black environment, I thought, well, this must be what they feel every day in Springfield. And I just walked in and felt very nervous. Was ashamed that I felt nervous because you don't know until you put yourself in the environment what's inside of you. I am less comfortable with those not like me. I'm less inclined to spend time social with those not like me. I'm less patient with those not like me. I give the benefit of the doubt less to those not like me. I express less grace when mistakes are made by those not like me. It's more difficult to get along with those not like me. I don't assume I'll get along with those not like me. I'm less willing to go out of my way to help those that aren't like me. I possess less positive assumptions about those not like me. We all have a circle. We got to step out of our circle and really show the love of Christ if we're going to be obedient to Jesus' teachings about the Good Samaritan. God made us beautiful and different. God made us diverse and beautiful. And so don't make assumptions about people. And here's the big thing, okay? I want everybody to get this. I was in a gathering with city leaders yesterday and leaders from the black community. I didn't talk until they asked me to talk. You know why? Because I got no problem people hearing my voice. It's people that have never had their voice heard that need to speak. I can learn more from them than by telling them what I think. And that's why James 1:19 says, my dear brothers and sisters, take note of this. Everyone should be quick to listen, slow to speak, and slow to become angry. Quick to listen, slow to speak. Understand first. You got to give your heart to people not like you. God is allowing things to be shaken up. This is the craziest season I've ever led our church through. We had COVID, we had economics, we have racial stuff coming to a head that needed to happen. Now we have white guys with skateboards breaking windows when all this is happening. People in, what is going on, you know? And so the Lord's coming back, and I'm going to talk to you next week about the Antichrist spirit in the land and the Antichrist that will be revealed. And all of this is being used by the Antichrist spirit to push us, not racial justice, but all the upheaval and unrest and difficulty is pushing society toward the things the Antichrist will bring. I'm going to talk about that next week. But the Bible says this, greater love, John 15:13, has no one than this than to lay down one's life for a friend. You need to voice your desire for justice. Voice your desire, live out your desire for ongoing love for your neighbor. Acknowledge that you might have some blind spots. Acknowledge that being raised in rural Missouri may not allow you to understand the experiences of your friends of color. Just because you're from the holler doesn't mean you get what it's like to be from the hood. And vice versa. Vice versa. Rename those people as my brother and my sister. Yeah. My brother and my sister. And Jesus said, love the Lord your God with all your soul and with all your mind. We can't change neighbor into another definition. We can't change neighbor into our own definition. How you label people, how you label police, how you label protesters, how you label minorities affects how you love them, So if you call them thugs, if you call them savages, if you call them pigs, if you call them whatever, you're dehumanizing so you don't have to love. And we need to pray for God moments and changed hearts. I tell you the truth because I love you. Don't have an axe to grind. I don't have an agenda. When I have to, I find myself fully in the middle, reaching to reconcile as best I can the little slab of the world that God's put me in. I'm no example. Jesus is the example. I point you to him. But right now we need to pray for our city, for changed hearts. As of at this moment right here, I have been encouraged by city governmental leadership in their willingness to listen and engage on these matters. And I'm thankful for that. I am thankful for the heart of our church. There have always been cynical voices that want to derail everything, and there's some truth to what they say, but we can't achieve the kind of godly objectives we want to achieve by letting cynical voices rule the day. We will move forward in the love of God. We will have a church that looks like heaven, and it will be at all levels. It won't just be a pocket at all levels, because that's what God has ordered for his church. There's a problem with our gospel, and in good conscience, I can't have the kind of church that repels minority populations in our city, however small they may be, through unconscious or purposeful bias. And we've done that. Like, I'm not saying anything new. That's what we do. It's what we're about. And that's what God's called you to if he's called you here. I love you. I want to pray for changed hearts. I want to pray that God would help us heal. I want to pray for our nation. I want to pray for you. I pray for our church. Let's just pray. Everybody, all locations, online, wherever you are. Jesus, in your great name, our nation will heal. Our leaders, not just in our local community, but I pray for an awakening in all of our leaders, God, in the Congress, in the House, in the White House, everywhere, God. Help us all to come to a God awareness, Lord, so that we love as you have called us to love, so that your objectives live in us, so that we're not just blindly wounding people and not caring. Let your grace be upon us. Let your spirit work in us. Let your power move through us. Let your name be established in our hearts. Lord, help us to see the beauty of your creation. Help us, Lord, to understand what we need to understand for this season for good. And Lord, help us to never go back. Like, I pray that, Lord, there would never be a time in the life of our church when we love in a way that doesn't allow people to center themselves around you. We understand there's tension, heartache, sorrow, and difficulty, but we, Lord, let our hearts love in a way that honors you. And Lord, for every person that's far from you today, Lord, I pray that you would pull on them by your Spirit right now. Let the hand of God, the Spirit of God, the strength of God be upon your children today to heal.